So thank you for the organizing committee for asking to have a speak and being a part of the team. So I was very delighted to accept this invitation because of the earlier research activities we have had with the Turkish colleagues about individualized care. And when this topic was given to me, the importance of ethics, so I just thought that would this be something about ethics in general, but I read this topic like ethics in nursing research, and then I selected to prepare the presentation about the ethical principles in research in general, and some rights of the patients and involving people with limited capacity, access to research site. And this is actually the main point here when we think about the COVID pandemic. So how to, in any case, to access to the sites. And then something about the data management, and then some resources, and this means collection of different articles and some other materials related to research ethics. And I'm coming from Finland, University of Turku. It is in the southwest coast of Finland, and in the opposite corner of the sea there is Stockholm and Sweden. So actually we are quite far away from Turkey, but I hope that the connection would be good and would work well. I have taken some examples from the newest literature, and actually nursing research is integrated here, but to more general other topics from the current journals have very important ideas or issues related to research ethics. For example, the one in the left upper corner, so about privacy and health. And I think that privacy is one of the main principles related to research ethics. And now we are using all kind of contact tracing apps, like we have national systems to follow up who has been affected by the COVID or coronavirus, how we would like to call it, and many debates, and also some misuse of the data already has been reported in some countries, that when there is a good system developed in a very short time and in a hurry, so there always is a possibility that somebody has a possibility to misuse the data. Although we aim for the good purposes to try to make beneficence for all of the citizens, but then always there are some individuals who want to kind of benefit from this kind of system, and not in a very positive way. And also a question has been raised about the recruitment of people for the clinical trials. Clinical trials, of course, they are very carefully selected. The participants are recruited in a careful process, but the target population has been kind of planned in a ways that it already focused on very narrow population. But then when the incidence and prevalence of COVID is now different in different countries, so national studies would give a different idea about national circumstances in one country, and then in other country it might be quite different. And of course, there is a need for inter-country or this kind of comparative studies or collaboration of many countries and researchers in order to understand it. And the most problematic here is that a very limited time to produce all the protocols in order to go on with the research, in order to have the evidence we need. Of course, we have had quite a lot of evidence about pandemia, but not necessarily just fitted for this pandemia. And my background is in gerontological nursing science, and I wanted to take an approach from the older people point of view here. We just currently made a review about unmet care needs, and we learned that the studies that were conducted, there were around 50 to 60, and even given in a country that we consider that there are very good fundamental care practices in this country, so most of the studies revealed unmet care needs of older people. And if we think about care needs, it means that it has been assessed already, and then there are omissions or something left undone or even missed the whole patient's needs. So this is the case in our general system. But now when we think about this COVID and the very heavy circumstances that the older people care settings are at the moment, so you can only guess what is the care, the quality, and the level of care quality in these units because of very restricted visiting of the family members or close ones, and depending on the very limited nursing professionals working in these units. So we can only afterwards look at how it went on. And then the fourth example is that how to study the professionals' experiences or their perceptions of the risk, perceived risk, because it's always the case that nurses and nursing professionals have a very high ethical standard to be available to care. So they consider it's a duty to care, and now it is for a long time it is very severe circumstances and situations with this pandemia. So they are really struggling for their own health and their families' health and their close ones' health. So how should we and how would we link all of these research topics if we are able to study in any case, but how would we approach? We know it is a heavy and very, very burdensome case, but how would we advance our understanding? We have plenty of studies regarding moral distress and similar, even moral injury has been taken into account when we speak about this COVID pandemia from the staff's point of view. But also an ethical issue here is that how we approach. The first step in the research protocol is to select the topic. And how would we see the topic, and are we seeking for the negative issues like moral distress might be one of those consequences, or should we look at instead moral courage, or this is only one example, but trying to show how we ethically frame the approach. And if we have any quantitative approaches in our studies, so it is very clear that what we ask is what we get. So the choice of the topic is the first step of thinking about research ethics and ethics in nursing research. This could be condensed to the whole issue. It is a very good article by Smith from 2008. So how we struggle with the basic four main ethical principles like non-maleficence, beneficence, autonomy, and justice. And we use some approaches like, of course, when we do research, we need ethics committee to see the protocols, to assess all the ethical views, how people have been informed, how they are asked or recruited in the study, and how to safeguard all the rights that the participants in research will have. What is the safety issue, well-being, and so on. So this is to secure that there is no non-maleficence, no doing harm. But then from the individual's point of view, autonomy is a question, and I would challenge also looking autonomy in the way that every single individual has a right to participate in the study. And what we do usually is that we exclude people who have cognitive deficits. We exclude people who are very vulnerable, who don't have capacities or are not able to express their views in the way that the researcher is aiming, like one interview contact or similar. And I would challenge us as nursing researchers to think broader. If we always exclude big groups like I mentioned, so what are we actually getting from our studies? The people who we take care in our systems are the aging individuals for the most, like in hospitals or in nursing homes or in community. So therefore, I challenge our ethics and our understanding about what it means to have access or to have the right to be a participant in a study. Of course, giving informed consent or having somebody to give the informed consent on behalf of the participant if not able to give that. So there is a balance always within this. But if we think about from the paternalism's point of view, then we just think that we have to safeguard the vulnerable people. But if we really want to facilitate the service users' perspectives, like their viewpoint, their experiences, like about the holistic nursing care, like we were listening at the previous presentation. So then we need to find out how to make this involvement possible and give justice. And this is easily said. I know this is easily said, but I would like to challenge our ideas about who are the participants. And of course, at the moment, the society is needing research evidence about the care settings, about the care of COVID, the vaccinations, the practices that the nurses need to do, all of these issues, and society needs that information. And therefore, it's our task to give evidence with which we can have an impact and what we can implement into practice. That the professionals are now struggling to have all of the equipments and so on, all of the places. And there we also come to the leadership in nursing. Actually, we know, and I don't want to say that this COVID pandemic, it is one topic among other things. And in every research, in every effort, we need to know and we need to follow the basic rules, the basic ethical principles in clinical research. And this means knowing the codes of ethics. There are plenty of those. There are for research, for practice, for different professionals, groups, and we have a legislation, regulation, guidelines. And I think that this is one of the most, how would I say, legislated area by different documents and information we have. And still, how easily we could violate dignity or the rights of the participants and so on. I'm going to show some ideas later on, some details to go into some of these, but the same concepts here, the main principles, autonomy and non-maleficence, avoid harm, do not harm, and justice, they go here like in a similar frame like in the previous slide. And I take some examples regarding these topics I have given here. So how would we ensure the whole ethical framework here that we are doing research that has social value, that we collaborate with the best possible researchers in order to advance our understanding and to do a research that is rigor and has scientific validity, having fair subject selection or the recruitment, having favorable risk-benefit ratio, like if we are aiming to go to interview of the older individuals or nurses in their care settings or patients in acute hospitals where there is a restricted access to the care site, or independent review, meaning that this has consequences also for publication ethics. How would we review the articles? We should keep the same requirements for quality and scientific rigor. Although we very rapidly need evidence to be published. And then informed consent and respect for participants. So many of those issues that are important to think about from the very beginning of making the research protocol and proposal and stating also the research questions. What can we actually have access at the moment, and we are not necessarily having access to those settings we urgently need to have. Just to highlight some of the ideas that how to make or how to receive the voluntary consent or refuse. And this really goes throughout the whole process. If somebody is volunteering and giving informed consent, is it going to last, or should the researcher consider this throughout the whole process? And especially important when people are at hospitals receiving care. So this pandemic is also possibly causing some pressure for people who have had care, and they might be afraid of negative consequences if they are not participating in the studies they are asked to, and also how to mark the informed consent. Is it orally given, in writing, how to mark it, who gave it, and especially if people are unconscious in the ICU, who has the right to use the personal data from these circumstances. So this is not a clear issue at the moment. We can approach from the broad research ethics perspective, but it is not clear. And then if you start to join in the study and then you want to stop or discontinue, how do you do it, and how the researchers give a possibility to kind of withdraw from the study. And what is the information then? I think that I'm sitting in the ethics committee of a big university, and the problematic question is that is the information enough, or is it written in the way that it is understood by lay people, or is it the jargon made by the researchers using typical words that we use in research, like in professional research. And the question since the new Data Act, so who is processing of personal data, where it is restored, who has access, and so on. I come this a bit later on. But if you have the information, then do you have sufficient time to consider this decision, and then what possible questions you might have, and have you understood it in the proper way, so you are really aware of that what you are participating in. And now when we speak about the pandemic, so some research topics might be, for example, the vaccination research topics, like there might be also potential harm and risks. So how to deal with those, how to be informed about the potential harms, possibly we don't even know, but how to act, and how this relates to the voluntary participation. And then usually we think about that, what are the benefits of the research to a large extent to individuals, and not necessarily very large, but to society, of course. And then how to make a very neutral information leaflet, not to kind of tell or ask people to agree based on that they are having kind of how would I say, that they are leaving out something, or this kind of unfavorable information. So it has to be very clear and concise, and then voluntary consent after that. And again, now it's always a question about when we are nurse researchers here. So are we working somewhere, or do we have a position in a clinical setting, or what is the role of the researcher, and how to separate research activity from the care activity. And especially when we come to study older people, this is not always clear. They think that the nurse who is possibly recruiting considers them to be a kind of, it is a care, not necessarily a scientific research. So the ethical point here is that the people need to know the role, who is recruiting and who is the researcher, and actually how to have access to the research site. And then the extra issue is that if we are involving people with limited capacity, as I started, that every single individual has a similar right, or is fair and justice to have an access to a research, be a participant, to say a word, to say the perceptions or the experiences. So how to receive, or how to ask the informed consent, and how to inform about that this is a research study, not the care itself. And then possibly we need the approval of the legal representative, like giving the consent. And in any case, then the research participants somehow needs to give their assent. And the high responsibility here of the researcher is that if you doing the research in action, you recognize somehow that this is not in the best interest of the participant or the person, or there is tiredness or kind of disconnected with the research. So the researcher must discontinue and stop. So they are very general, easy to say. But for example, if we are interviewing patients suffering from pandemic COVID at the moment. So how to be sure that they have strength to go on, because it is very heavy for those who are in the hospital at the moment, or if you have been unconscious, so what are your expressions? Possibly you don't know what has happened, and so on. So they could be very harmful. Also, these questions for your informant, trying to remember something or violating some privacy issues, for example. So it has to be a very strong ethical conscious in researchers always, and especially in the circumstances like we are living at the moment. So some slides about access to research sites, and just to give some examples about how we can give access or how we can easily refuse. And this can be in 3 different levels, and this refers also to those who are in vulnerable situations. So I am in the opinion that every single topic and every single issue can be studied, but the selection of methods, the sensitivity of the methods, and the high level of research ethics are the boundaries. How to make the protocol appropriate, considering all of the rights of all of the parties. But it could easily end up to very strict refusal from the organizations at the moment, for example, to let the researchers go into the clinical practice. And what is the main target at the moment is to have international research for vaccination and all of these medications. And what is the difference and difficulties between country comparisons to have the institutional review board? This means also, this could mean ethical approval, but usually this also means the permissions to conduct the studies. So how long does it take? Is it 2 weeks or even 8 months? That happened in my previous research, international research proposal, that the longest in one country was 8 months to have all the criminal check and all the ethical approval, all the permissions. And the shortest was 2 weeks in one country, where the systems were very clear and the ethical committees met very frequent, very often, and the system was based on different system or protocols. And we have many guidelines, many legislation, policy papers that makes this international study very difficult. But even in one organization, if we think about local organizations in different countries, so these guidelines and access policies might be very different from others. So inside one small country, it could be very challenging for the research team to have access to the organization. And during these pandemic situations, many topics or many ongoing research protocols and recruitment were cancelled because of the fear of this pandemic situation, and trying to limit the people who are coming and going into hospitals, for example. So there are this kind of invisible barriers that we don't recognize possibly, and it is the easiest way, of course, for the organization also to say that now our staff is so burdened that it is not necessary to take any researchers or any research going on in this institution. And again, for international comparative studies, how to make the study, the recruitment and all the inclusion-exclusion in activities level, how to make them comparable in order to produce relevant, valid data or comparison in all of the countries. So this really might have some gray hair for the researchers at the moment. And of course, the main aim is the basics from the paternalism, that we want to guarantee the safeguarding participants in organizations, and that's the leader's point of view, but also trying to find out or broaden the idea for autonomy and justice. So not an easy task. But consider if we have get access to the research organization, what happens in the unit level? Are our nursing leaders supporting it? They are the key persons, by the way, the unit nurse leaders. What is their attitude toward evidence seeking based on research? There are different leaders, there are different units, and it is sad to say that even in many countries where there has been a long tradition in nursing science, some of the units are very negative in their aim or will to let any researcher to collect any data, not from the professionals, but not necessarily from the patients as well. But nursing staff is the precondition, of course, and they are a valuable help in recruitment or data collection, because outsiders, the researchers, are not having any position necessarily in the unit. So we need to do collaboration. And this is the peculiar, I have been thinking a lot that researchers has the duty to give evidence. And nursing staff they have a duty to give the best possible evidence-based practice and evidence-based nursing. So how to make this together? So it is our collaboration that is producing the endpoint here, but how to do it in a very how would I say collaborative and professional way. And of course, at the time now when we have the COVID, so the nurses have very heavy shifts and they have plenty to do, and their colleagues might be somewhere affected by the COVID or something like that. So there might be also limited amount of staff members. So this is a big question, but it also could be that if the attitudes are negative, so are nurses who are recruiting ignoring some of the weakest, those in the weakest condition, or those who are more vulnerable, without even asking if people are eager to participate. And then the third level is, of course, the individual level and how to receive the informed consent here. And I think that when we are considering the consent capacity and vulnerability, so we need to understand that people are vulnerable because of some illnesses or some health problems, some situations, or they don't have ability or capacity to tell their view, and this is different from being vulnerable too, because with research we could also do some harm. So we need to separate these two. And this first one, vulnerable because, this only means that we need to take this vulnerability into account when we are recruiting. We know these are, in any case, this group of people is vulnerable, like the minors, children, people who are dying, for example. They are very vulnerable because of the situation. And then what we are studying, not to do harm, was the main ethical principle here. It is a very good paper by this Bracken, Ross and colleagues about the concept of vulnerability. So I suggest reading and considering what it means for our research policies and guidelines, and not to only just tell that the nurses that they tell that, okay, they are too vulnerable, we excluded them because of something. And of course, this informed consent given should be confirmed during the continuation of the study. So it is not only in the beginning, but taking care of the whole process. Just one example. This does not this did not consider any pandemic situation, but from the older people care settings, and we collected from the research ethics point of view. We analyzed all studies. I don't remember, it was from 2012, so this is many years ago, but an example of how researchers explain research ethics in the articles that where the topics were very covering the intimacy, privacy, this kind of issues in older people care settings. And actually it was out of these studies, there were actually 89, if I remember correctly. No, 66 were those articles that were included in the review. So only in single studies there were anything about ethics in the problem statement, and there were privacy in toilet situation. They were considering what help people got when they are in toilet and showering, and very sensitive issues, and only a single or few reported anything about the problem statement. Actually, that the problem statement was having very ethical issues in it. And the similar was in reporting, ethics in reporting, how it was explained about how to reveal or not to reveal information in qualitative studies, for example, that do not reveal who is the respondents, without any detailed information about the informant. The context under which the explanation has been given could also reveal some private information. So there were some qualitative studies regarding very sensitive issues, and I would conclude that some of the text would really point out who is the individual with very rare condition, for example. And then if the study questions or the study itself is about ethics, so there were very rare mentions in the implications. So it's also a question about reporting. And coming back especially to this pandemic situation, we are gone quite far with the data and open science, and we even open data for future research, or we kind of archive the data for later use, secondary use. And actually, it was very new publication from these boundaries of open science and innovation. So how is data traceable, and how and where should we archive, or who handle, or where we publish open data that includes also our genomics? And what is the biosecurity? And actually we have many legislation in many countries, but the real, how would I say, practice has not been convincing totally yet. So we have plenty to do. And although we have all the digital archives, so there might be some hackers, like it was in our news in Finland that there was one hacker who got or get in to patient registry about psychotherapy, individual people's health data, contact details, everything. So our systems are not yet that developed well. And it's our responsibility. Of course, it's the responsibility of the university, what kind of guidelines, and the national open science repositories. And could we, for example, move data from Europe to United States and vice versa? So what are the national guidelines? And then, of course, when we are doing now plenty of research to try to help in this COVID situation, so there might be also questions, ethical questions about ownership, about the data, access to data, where is stored, in what format, who has the backup copy, who and how destroyed. Very relevant questions at the moment, because we are collecting many statistics registries for later use about this corona COVID situation to learn later. I have collected some material here. Sorry, they are from the European Union, but they are accessible. And also the basic principles of biomedical ethics, Beecham and Childress. Then some references that could be very useful in research ethics about consent, informed consent, decision-making competence, vulnerability, these kind of issues for the researchers, especially in older people. Some of those are used in my slides. So we have plenty of research about the requirements of research ethics to ease cross-country or the international research teams, for example, how to access to research sites quickly, considering and preparing all the papers according to the standards of each country and so on. And then we come lastly to the publication ethics. So now when we are having the open access publications and everything, so it would be a choice for many research teams to try to publish in open access journals, and because of the results are needed to be read by the audience worldwide. And this may also be a rapid way, but also has to be very careful about selecting the appropriate, ethically high standard of open access journals, because there are still those predatory journals that are kind of seeking for victims. So I would like to say it, because people have a pressure to quickly publish their results for use in society. So some ideas about that. So it's license to conduct research ethically. Thank you.